I've been sitting on this story for years, and I guess tonight's the night I finally type it out. I'm not looking for sympathy or redemption points, just trying to be honest in a way I never was back then. For the sake of this post, you can call me William. That's my real name anyway, and at this point it feels pointless to hide behind a throwaway identity. This happened during my early 20s, back when I was convinced I was smarter than everyone else and unlucky enough to need side hustles just to stay afloat. I wasn't born into crime. No dramatic childhood, no movie-worthy origin story. Just bad money decisions, a constant sense of being behind everyone else, and a growing comfort with bending rules until bending them didn't feel like bending anymore. The crime I'm talking about here was my first big move in the drug business. Not the petty stuff, not the help a friend out nonsense I used to justify earlier. This was the moment where it stopped being casual and started being real. A large order, more money than I'd ever held at once, and for the first time, the very real possibility of police involvement stopped being an abstract fear and started feeling like a hand on my shoulder. What pushed me into it was equal parts desperation and ego. I wanted the money, sure, but more than that, I wanted to prove I could do it. That I wasn't just some guy scraping by. I told myself it was temporary, a one-time thing, just enough to get ahead. I believed that lie completely, and that belief is what scares me the most looking back. At the time, it felt like opportunity knocking. Now, I know it was something else entirely. To understand why that first big order even landed in my lap, you have to understand how casually it all started. I didn't wake up one day and decide to be a criminal. It was more like drifting into deep water without realizing how far you've swum until your feet stop touching the bottom. I was already hanging around people who lived just outside the lines. Friends of friends. Parties where everyone knew who to talk to if you wanted something stronger than beer. At first, I was just the guy who knew a guy. No money changed hands for me. I told myself I was just connecting dots, not doing anything wrong. Then people started insisting I take something for my trouble. Small amounts. Gas money. Thank you? I resisted at first, mostly out of fear, but also because I like thinking of myself as different from the rest of them. Cleaner. Smarter. That illusion didn't last long. Money has a way of quieting your conscience when you don't have much of it. I was behind on rent, juggling credit cards, lying awake at night doing math I never liked the answer to. When someone suggested I could make in one weekend what I usually made in a month, it felt less like a crime and more like a solution. The big order came through a guy I barely knew but trusted anyway because mutual connections vouched for him. That should have been my first red flag. He spoke calmly, professionally even, like we were discussing office supplies instead of something that could put me away for years. The normalcy of it all made it easier to say yes. I remember nodding along, pretending I wasn't terrified. Inside, though, something shifted. I knew this wasn't dabbling anymore. This was a line, and I had just stepped over it without even asking where it led. Once I said yes, the panic didn't hit right away. It came later, creeping in during quiet moments, like when I was brushing my teeth or trying to fall asleep. My brain kept replaying the same thought: you can't just wing this. So I did what I always did when I was scared. I overthought everything and called it planning. I told myself I needed to be careful, methodical, almost professional about it. If I treated it seriously, maybe it wouldn't spiral out of control. I made lists in my head. Not written down, never written down. Times, places, contingencies. I rehearsed conversations I hadn't even had yet, imagining what I'd say if someone got suspicious, or worse, if something went wrong. I started changing little things about my routine. Took different routes when I went out. Left my phone at home more often. Watched people in public the way you do when you're suddenly aware of how exposed you are. Every police car felt like it slowed down just for me. Every stranger's glance felt loaded with meaning. What's embarrassing is how much confidence I pretended to have. I talked big when I was around others, joked about stress like it was all no big deal. Inside, though, I was constantly negotiating with myself. Just do this cleanly, I'd think. No mistakes, no drama, and you're done. The night before everything was supposed to happen, I barely slept. Not because I was partying or celebrating, but because my heart wouldn't stop racing. I kept telling myself fear was normal, that it meant I wasn't reckless. That fear, somehow, was proof I was still in control. The day of the deal arrived quietly, which somehow made it worse. No dramatic build-up, no sirens in the distance. Just a gray morning and that heavy feeling in my chest like I'd already done something wrong and my body knew it before my brain fully accepted it. I remember checking the time obsessively. Every few minutes. I didn't want to be early and look suspicious, but being late felt even worse. I showered longer than usual, staring at my own reflection like I was trying to memorize the version of me that still had plausible deniability. Once I walked out the door, I knew that excuse would be gone. I dressed plain on purpose. Nothing memorable. I'd convinced myself that blending in was a skill you could consciously turn on, like wearing camouflage in a city. I kept my movements slow, deliberate, like acting calm would somehow make me calm. It didn't. The location had been chosen for its normalcy. That was the logic, anyway. A place where people came and went all the time, where no one paid attention unless you gave them a reason to. Sitting there, waiting, I started noticing everything. Who lingered too long, who glanced around, who looked at me twice. My imagination was running laps. I kept thinking about the size of the order. How this wasn't just a favor or a small exchange anymore. This was weight. This was money. This was the kind of thing people noticed if it went wrong. My mouth felt dry, and I remember wondering if I looked as nervous as I felt. That's when it hit me, fully and finally, there was no backing out without consequences. Saying no now wouldn't make this disappear. It would just change the kind of trouble I was in. And that realization, more than anything else, locked me into what came next. The moment the other person showed up, the whole thing stopped feeling hypothetical. Up until then, it had all lived in my head, plans, fears, mental rehearsals. But seeing someone walk toward me with the kind of casual confidence that comes from experience snapped me into the present in a way I wasn't ready for. We exchanged the kind of greeting you'd expect from acquaintances. Nothing suspicious. That almost threw me off more than anything else. I'd braced myself for tension, for coded language or awkward pauses, but it was all painfully normal. Anyone watching would have thought we were just two people killing time. My hands, on the other hand, were not getting the memo. I remember being hyper-aware of them, where they were, how they moved, whether they were shaking. Every small motion felt amplified, like the world had zoomed in on me specifically. I kept thinking, don't rush. Don't hesitate. Just act like you belong here. There was a brief moment where our eyes met, and I wondered if he could tell. If he could see the fear sitting just beneath my skin. Instead, he smiled slightly, like this was just another errand in his day. That scared me more than anything else. It meant this world existed whether I was ready for it or not. As things progressed, my internal monologue went completely silent. No more what-ifs. No more moral debates. Just focus. Just get through the next minute, then the one after that. Time felt strange, both too fast and painfully slow. That was the point of no return. The second I realized I wasn't just pretending anymore. I was doing it. And there was no version of this where I walked away unchanged. Right when I started to think, okay, maybe this will actually work, something small went wrong. Not dramatic, not movie-level chaos, but the kind of hiccup that feels catastrophic when your nerves are already fried. Someone nearby lingered longer than they should have. Just a regular person, probably waiting on someone else, probably not paying attention to us at all. But my brain immediately labeled them a threat. I could feel my pulse in my ears, that hot rush of adrenaline that makes every scenario turn into the worst-case version. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where it collapses. I started replaying what I'd say if things suddenly went sideways. I even had this absurd thought about how ridiculous it would be if this all unraveled because of something so mundane. The other guy noticed it too, or at least noticed me noticing. He gave me this look, not angry, not panicked, just assessing. Like he was measuring whether I was going to be a liability. That look stuck with me. It made me feel small, inexperienced, exposed. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence stretched just long enough to feel unnatural. I forced myself to breathe slower, to unclench my jaw, to stop acting like prey. Eventually, the person drifted off, and the world didn't end. But something had shifted. The fragile sense of control I thought I had was gone. I realized then how many variables I couldn't account for, no matter how much I planned. And that scared me more than the idea of getting caught. After that near miss, my body went into overdrive. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly I wasn't scared in the same way anymore. I was wired. Every sound felt sharper, every movement more deliberate. I remember thinking how strange it was that fear could morph into something that almost felt like clarity. We finished what we needed to finish without speaking much. Not because words weren't allowed, but because neither of us wanted to add anything unnecessary to the air. The less said, the better. I mirrored his calm as best I could, hoping confidence could be faked long enough to pass as real. What surprised me most was how normal I felt on the outside. No shaking, no sweating, no visible panic. Inside, though, my thoughts were sprinting. I kept imagining sirens, footsteps, someone calling my name from behind. Every few seconds I expected a hand to grab my shoulder. When we finally separated and walked in opposite directions, I didn't look back. I told myself beforehand that looking back would be a mistake, like admitting guilt to the universe. So I kept walking, heart pounding, trying not to break into a run. That walk, those few minutes afterward, felt longer than the entire day before it. I wasn't safe yet, but I wasn't actively doing anything either. Just moving through space, carrying the weight of what I'd just done and realizing I couldn't undo it, no matter how badly I might want to. I thought the hardest part would be over once I walked away. I was wrong. The real torture started afterward, when there was nothing left to do but think. Every step I took felt too loud. Every car that passed slowed my breathing. I kept replaying the last half hour in my head, searching for mistakes the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue. Did I stand out? Did I hesitate too long? Did someone notice something they shouldn't have? I took a longer route than usual, doubling back more than once just to make sure I wasn't being followed. Rationally, I knew I probably wasn't, but logic doesn't stand a chance against adrenaline-fueled paranoia. My brain was determined to punish me with every possible scenario. When I finally got somewhere private, the silence was overwhelming. No distractions, no witnesses, just me and the reality of what I'd done. I remember sitting there, listening for sounds that weren't there, half expecting a knock that never came. What unsettled me most was how alive I felt. Not relieved. Not proud. Just buzzing. Like my body hadn't caught up to my conscience yet. That scared me in a way I didn't know how to articulate at the time, but I feel it clearly now. I told myself to calm down, that this was just nerves, that it would pass. But deep down, I knew something had changed. And I wasn't sure I liked who I was becoming, but I also wasn't sure I cared enough to stop. Once the paranoia dulled into a low, constant hum, my brain did what it does best when it's cornered. It started making excuses. Not out loud, not to anyone else, just quiet little justifications I fed myself so I could breathe normally again. I told myself no one got hurt. That this was victimless, abstract, just numbers changing hands. I reminded myself how many people did worse things and slept just fine at night. I compared myself to some imaginary version of a real criminal, and decided I didn't qualify. That mental gymnastics routine should have earned me a medal. I even reframed the fear as proof of responsibility. See? I thought. You're scared because you care. Bad people don't feel like this. It's amazing how convincing a lie can be when it's protecting you from facing yourself. I checked my phone constantly, half expecting some message that would confirm my worst fears. Nothing came. No warnings. No fallout. The quiet almost felt mocking, like the universe was daring me to believe I'd gotten away with it. That's when another dangerous thought crept in. If nothing happened, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. That idea settled in slowly, comfortably, like it had been waiting for an invitation. And once it was there, it didn't want to leave. Looking back, this was the moment that mattered more than the deal itself. Not the exchange, not the fear, but the way I talked myself into thinking it was okay. That's how lines move without you noticing. That's how, just this once, turns into a pattern. The days after were worse than the day itself. I kept expecting consequences to arrive on a schedule I didn't understand, like I'd missed a memo about when the other shoe drops. Every knock on the door made my stomach flip. Every unknown number felt loaded. I watched the news more than usual, scanning headlines for anything that even vaguely resembled my situation. I read too much into everything. A bust across town? Must be connected. A police car parked on my street? Definitely for me. My imagination was relentless. At the same time, life kept going. People laughed, paid bills, complained about traffic. I went to work and nodded along in conversations I barely heard. It was surreal carrying this secret, while everything else stayed painfully normal. I felt like I was wearing a costume no one else could see. What really messed with me was the waiting without action. There was nothing I could fix, nothing I could undo. I couldn't talk about it, couldn't ask for reassurance, couldn't even admit to myself how scared I still was. So I waited, suspended between fear and the fragile hope that silence meant safety. That limbo taught me something ugly about myself. I was already calculating how long it would take before I felt okay doing it again, if I ever did. The fact that part of me was even asking that question should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I treated it like just another intrusive thought and pushed it down. Eventually, the fear started to thin out, not disappear, just lose its sharp edges. It didn't happen all at once. It was more like waking up one day and realizing your shoulders aren't clenched as tightly as they were before. Nothing happened. No calls. No visits. No consequences that announced themselves dramatically. And that absence became its own kind of answer. My nervous system took it as permission to relax, even if my conscience wasn't fully on board. That's when the thrill crept in, uninvited but undeniable. Not excitement exactly, more like a quiet pride I didn't want to admit to. I'd faced something terrifying and come out the other side intact. There was a dangerous confidence in that realization, like I'd passed a test I never should have taken. I hated that part of myself for feeling it. Or at least, I told myself I did. In reality, I kept revisiting the memory, replaying it not just to look for mistakes anymore, but to relive the intensity. Fear and adrenaline had fused into something that felt meaningful, and that scared me more than the original crime. That was the crack. The moment where the experience stopped being a warning and started becoming a reference point. A benchmark. And once you have one of those, it's way too easy to start measuring future decisions against it. When I finally let myself look at what I'd gained from all this, it wasn't the money that hit me first, it was what the money represented. It sat there, quiet and unassuming, like it didn't care how it came into my life. That bothered me more than I expected. I paid off things I'd been stressing about for months. Rent. A bill I'd been dodging. Groceries without doing mental math in the aisle. On the surface, it looked like relief. Like proof that I'd solved a problem. But every time I used that money, there was this flicker of discomfort, like I was being watched by a version of myself I didn't recognize. I started noticing how easy it was to compartmentalize. I wasn't acting different around friends or family. No one suspected anything. That scared me too, how seamlessly I could slide back into normal life while carrying something this heavy under the surface. Late at night, though, when distractions ran out, I'd catch my reflection and feel this quiet disconnect. I wasn't horrified by what I'd done. I wasn't proud either. I was just, altered. Like I'd unlocked a door in my head that didn't close all the way afterward. That's when I realized the biggest cost wasn't legal risk or moral guilt. It was how easily I'd learned to live with it. Just when I'd started to believe the whole thing was officially in the past, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Nothing dramatic about that, except my stomach dropped instantly, like my body recognized danger before my brain caught up. It wasn't the police. It wasn't anyone threatening me. It was someone adjacent to the situation. Calling like this was all routine, like we were discussing plans that could be picked up any time. Casual. Assumptive. As if my participation going forward was a given. I remember pacing while I talked, trying to keep my voice even. Every word felt like it carried extra weight. I gave vague answers, non-answers, bought myself time. When the call ended, I just stood there staring at my phone, heart racing all over again. That call did something important. It reminded me this wasn't a closed chapter. It wasn't a one-off unless I made it one. Other people now saw me as part of that world, whether I liked it or not. And worlds like that don't let you drift away quietly. For the first time since the deal, I felt real fear again, not of getting caught, but of getting comfortable. Of how easy it would be to say yes again, and how hard it would be to explain why I shouldn't. After that call, I spent a long time pretending I was weighing options when, really, I was weighing versions of myself. The one who kept going because it was easier, and the one who stopped before the costs got worse. I told myself I was being rational, but fear was doing most of the talking. I started creating distance in small, careful ways. Slower replies. Missed messages that weren't actually missed. I framed it as being busy, overwhelmed, dealing with stuff. None of that was a lie, exactly, it just wasn't the whole truth. The truth was I was trying to fade out without making noise. That period was tense in a quieter way. No adrenaline spikes, no near misses, just the constant worry that someone would push back, call me out, force a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. I practiced explanations I hoped I'd never have to use. Illness. Family problems. Anything that sounded final enough to discourage follow-up. What surprised me was how conflicted I felt. Part of me was relieved every day nothing happened. Another part felt like I was backing out of something I'd already proven I could do. That's a messed up thing to admit, but it's true. Walking away didn't feel heroic. It felt uncertain, fragile, like it could collapse if tested. Eventually, the silence stretched long enough to feel intentional. Calls stopped. Messages dried up. Whether I successfully exited or just got lucky, I still don't know. But I do know that the fear never fully left, it just changed shape. I didn't get caught. Not then, not later. No dramatic ending, no courtroom scenes, no redemption arc tied up with a bow. Life just kept going. And in some ways, that's the most unsettling part of all of it. What stayed with me wasn't the money or even the fear. It was the knowledge of how easily I crossed that line, and how quickly I learned to live on the other side of it. I learned that I'm capable of rationalizing things I once swore I never would. That's not a flattering lesson, but it's an honest one. If there's anything I'd warn people about, it's this: the first step is always smaller than you think, and the consequences don't always show up right away. Sometimes they settle in quietly, changing how you see risk, control, and yourself. Sometimes getting away with it does more damage than getting caught ever could. I don't tell this story to sound tough or clever. I tell it because I still think about that version of me, the one who was terrified, convinced he was just doing what he had to do. I wish I could tell him that temporary choices have a way of lingering long after the situation that justified them is gone. If you're standing at the edge of something like this, telling yourself it's just once, just this one fix, just this one chance, pause. Really pause. Ask yourself who you'll be if nothing bad happens. Because that's the version you'll have to live with. That was my first big order. And even though it didn't end my life, it definitely rerouted it.